Let me bring in former federal prosecutor now, Seth Waxman. Jill Wine-Banks, an MSNBC contributor, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor, is with me. And so is presidential historian, MSNBC contributor, and author of a new book. The new book, of course, being called... the new book is called The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels. Jon Meacham is with me as well. Seth, let me start with you, and let's start with the news of the day here. This assertion that Rudy Giuliani is making now. He's talking to NBC News, saying that they seem to be closer to having the president sit down with special counsel Bob Mueller. What do you make of that, Seth?
Well, I think that's a product of the fact that he was going to have to do that. I think Mr. Giuliani understands that if he were to refuse to sit down voluntarily, that Bob Mueller and his team would issue a grand jury subpoena that would compel the president to participate in that process. And ultimately, if Mr. Trump and his team were to challenge that up into the courts, he would ultimately lose. So knowing that is how it would ultimately turn out, it seems that they are now moving towards actually sitting down with Mr. Mueller. And, you know, he's in a bit of a difficult spot. You know, any criminal defense lawyer would tell their client not to participate in something like this. But the president, if he were to plead the fifth, and that's the only way out, has the political ramifications that no other criminal target or subject of an investigation faces. So while he's in a rock and a hard place, it sounds like they are coming to terms with the fact that they have no choice but to deal with Mr. Mueller in this regard.
Jill, I want to go back to what Rudy Giuliani said last night. He said it again this morning, that a sitting president cannot be indicted. Is that true?
That is not true. It is an undecided issue. The Supreme Court has never ruled on it. A vice president was indicted, Spiro Agnew, during the Nixon administration. So if a vice president can't be, why not a president? We, during Watergate, thought that the president could be indicted, but Leon Jaworski was convinced that impeachment was the politically correct method to proceed. In that case, we had a Congress that was actually already bipartisan and considering impeachment. So we gave a report to that Congress for them to use as a roadmap to impeachment. And we knew that they would act on it so that it was safe. In this case, turning over a report to Congress that showed the evidence that would justify impeachment does not necessarily result in any action. So in this case, an indictment might be the only way to bring about justice. And I think that under the rules, this prosecutor can ask to be relieved of the rule of the Department of Justice that there cannot be an indictment. It is not a law. It is just simply an Office of Legal Counsel rule. And so it could be waived.
Jon Meacham, this president has been consistent on his characterization of the investigation. This is what President Trump said just after the start of the investigation 1 year ago. Take a listen.
Was this the right move, or is this part of a witch hunt?
Well, I respect the move, but the entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign. But I can always speak for myself and the Russians, zero. Believe me, there's no collusion. There was no collusion. And everybody, even my enemies, have said there is no collusion.
That's been the line from day one, Jon Meacham. Historically, presidents have resisted investigations, whether it's Nixon, whether it's Clinton. What is different about the way that this president has dismissed this investigation from the start?
Well, no one's been as relentless, I think, it's safe to say, and has made such frequent assertions of his innocence as President Trump has. We're in a fascinating stress test here about the rule of law, about whether a president can be the subject of a criminal indictment. The interesting thing about impeachment is that the framers of the Constitution never defined what high crimes and misdemeanors meant. Gerald Ford once said that a high crime and misdemeanor is whatever a majority of the House and the Senate decide it is at a given moment. And so that's almost not entirely different, but it's a pretty different creature than the wheels of justice as it unfolds. The interesting thing, I think, about this is President Nixon was the best evidence of his obstruction of justice, of his cover-up, came very late in the game, and he actually resigned before that tape. It was a tape from 1972 where he had tried to have one agency block the work of another. That came out in late July of 1974, and Nixon was gone by August 9th. And so, to some extent, we're in unprecedented grounds here, because the question of dealing with a foreign power is different in degree, if not of kind, in terms of obstruction and cover-ups than the Clinton matter was.
John, there's this report out in the Washington Post today, and it looks at the Mueller investigation as it goes into its second year, and it contrasts the two teams, the special counsel's team and the president's team. This is just an excerpt from the article. The Mueller operation, like the former Marine Corps platoon commander who leads it, is secretive and methodical. 10 blocks west from the White House, President Trump combats the probe with bluster, disarray, and defiance as he scrambles for survival. As you look at the different styles of the two sides here, John Meacham, what's your assessment of their approach to this?
Well, it is a little like the War of the Worlds, right? I mean, it's two entirely different planets. You have, in the Mueller operation, you have what a lot of journalists will tell you is the most leak-proof operation they've ever seen. In fact, there's a lot of complaining about that. It's hard to get anything out of that office, if anything at all. The president is is carrying on as he entered politics. He's, as you say, blustering. He's making assertions. He's fighting a PR war as much as a legal war, whereas Mueller is fighting on legal time. There is this distinction between legal time and political time. Legal time is more geological. It doesn't work neatly according to election cycles or news cycles. And what the president's done, and it may prove effective, is by calling everything fake news, by calling it a witch hunt. I mean, one thing we might think about is sometimes witch hunts might actually produce a witch. You know, that's not unthinkable. He has managed to create a great deal of chaos, and in an attempt, I think, to pre-delegitimize, if you will, not the most eloquent term, but pre-delegitimize anything that Director Mueller comes out with.
Jill, one of the things that's also been fairly striking, especially over the last 24 hours or so, the role that Rudy Giuliani continues to play here as the president's outside counsel. It seems as if he's no longer completely denying collusion. He said that, you know, even if there was collusion, maybe it's not illegal. He also dismissed this DOJ report, or actually cited this DOJ report, saying that a sitting president couldn't be indicted. But the president continues to maintain there was no collusion, there was no obstruction. Rudy Giuliani's role, is he lending advice to this president, or is he being deployed to do cable news, to muddy the waters, to convince the base that no matter the outcome, the fix is in?
Well, whatever Rudy Giuliani's role is supposed to be, he's not being effective. I would say he's doing a great deal of harm to the president. He has not been good on television in defending the president. He has said things that have forced disclosures. I would say that the amendment in the May 15th release of financial information was because Rudy Giuliani accidentally said, well, of course the president paid back Michael Cohen for the $130,000. That's not very good. But I also want to add to something John said, which is, this is definitely not a witch hunt, and that's proved by how many indictments have resulted, how many guilty pleas, how many cooperating witnesses. One is already in jail serving time. And if it is a witch hunt, it's a successful one because of those very numbers of how many people have been captured. So it can't be both. It's either a successful witch hunt or it's not a witch hunt at all. And I would say it's not a witch hunt, that this is a very proper investigation that started because an Australian diplomat reported that Papadopoulos had told him that Russia had compromising information on Hillary Clinton and was offering it to Trump. So we need to focus on what the facts are. We need to focus on what this is really about.
13 charged, 3 companies charged, 5 guilty pleas so far. Jill, thank you. Mr. Meacham, you're going to come back a little bit later in the hour. We're going to spend some time talking about your book, Seth Waxman. Thanks as always to you as well.